And now, AM 650 presents your source for leading-edge news and information on today's hottest products and services. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.
Well, hello, and welcome to Experts on Call. This edition is Key Pacific's Talk About Strata. I'm Sterling Fox, joined in studio by my co-host Tony Giventu, the Executive Director of the Condominium Homeowners Association of British Columbia and Vancouver Province, and too many other newspapers to mention all at one breath. Condo columnist, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Sterling. We're having a great summer, aren't we?
We are having an outstanding summer, and you brought Paul Mendez back, so please reintroduce our guest to our listeners.
Well, Paul Mendez is a lawyer extraordinaire from L'Esperance Mendez, and their firm does quite a lot of work with strata corporations, specifically around things like major construction and warranties and insurance and those types of claims. They represent strata corporations in helping them get through their litigation process or to negotiate through and when they're dealing with claims or disputes involved around construction. So
nice of you to join us again, Paul.
Thank you, Sterling. Thank you for having me back.
Well, it's great to have you back, and boy, it's always fun to have a lawyer on board, Tony, because especially on this edition of Talk About Strata, because we're going to talk about those sorts of major construction and renovation projects that strata corporations have to do, the kinds of necessary upgrades and repairs that I suppose in some cases condo owners kind of dread, but understand, Tony, that these do come up, they will come up, and they must be done.
Well, I kind of put them in the class of the forget about it projects until it's too late and you have to really think about it. And the forget about it projects are the things you can't see until they start to fail.
Okay.
Right? And we have a lot of those in buildings. Roofing is a good example.
Sure.
But one of the things that we really deal with a lot is major construction on older buildings around redoing infrastructure in the building.
Okay.
And so when the water piping fails and it gets to a certain age, copper piping, polybutylene, PEX piping, different types of piping materials that are used only have a limited life expectancy, right? So now we have people who are starting to do depreciation reports. They're somebody's actually starting to assess these conditions now, starting to say to them, hey, wait a minute, you might only have a few years left of this. You need to start looking at redoing your piping.
Okay.
You don't want to wait until you start having leaks before you're redoing piping. If you wait for leaks, you're going to start compounding all of your other problems, though.
Sure. Now, Paul, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
you said that, Tony said that you and your firm do a lot of work with strata corporations, either helping to negotiate contracts to get all of these major renovation jobs done, or in some cases litigating an outcome to disputes involving these renovations.
Yes.
So when should a strata corporation consult a lawyer first? When they know they've got a massive project like repiping an apartment building, or say, Tony, how many units are we going to use for our sample building today?
Well, a sample building, we won't identify their location or name, but the sample building is actually a 120-unit high-rise building.
Okay, so that's a fair number. Yeah.
It's in Vancouver. It's 27, 28 years old, and they're doing just this right now. They're going through the whole issue of having to redo the piping in the building. And it seems like a straightforward kind of thing, but we had piping that was poured in the concrete. So it can't be replaced in the concrete. So it's a whole new world now,
big
right?
job.
So they're going to have to start looking at other ways of mounting the piping in the building because they can't bust out the concrete and replace the pipes.
Absolutely.
So it's going to be different types of construction. We're going to be dealing with people's homes, how they've renovated and alterations and upgrades, different kind of things that are going to be special features within units like kitchen islands. So some of the basics that take all those things, they're going to have to think about how they're going to pay for it, when they're going to pay for it, how they're going to negotiate the contracts, and all of these relationships as you start going through this are going to require maybe some significant changes to the building appearance inside,
possibly,
use of property. There are going to be a lot of different contract negotiations where they're going to need some legal advice as they go through this.
And Paul, when do lawyers typically get called in on a project this size? And as a second part to that question, when should they be called in? Because perhaps the two aren't an identical answer.
That's right. You'd be surprised. I'm going to say that about half the time that I get a call, the contracts have already been signed. And that's a little bit late to reopen them for negotiation.
Absolutely, yep.
And
a deal is a deal, right?
A deal is a deal. And people will say to me, well, can you at least review them and tell us about things we should be worried about? And oftentimes I say, sure, I can do that for you. But you're going to have that for information. The horse is out of the barn.
Yeah.
I think certainly early on, before you sign anything that's going to commit the strata to go down this path.
And we're talking big bucks all the way through a project of this size, aren't we?
These projects can be in the millions of dollars.
Absolutely.
Yeah, easily 7 to 12,000 a unit.
Okay.
Easily.
Mm-hmm. And this is on a 128 unit building. Okay.
Yeah. This is
easily 7 figures and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this will be over. This will probably be $1.5 million on this project.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Paul, ideally, though, the Strata Corporation, once the decision has been taken to go forward with this very necessary repair job, that's when they should call you.
Well, there may be a situation where they should be calling us before that decision is taken. And the reason I say that is in most stratas that'll have a replumbing, it'll be an older building, and you'll have a lot of resistance to this size of a project. And so one of the things that the strata may need some advice on is what are its repair obligations? How should it approach getting the project reviewed? Is it going to be done through a special levy, essentially a cash call on the owners? Is there going to be financing for it? All of those things, those issues need to be considered before the owners are asked to make a formal approval of that decision. And it may be a good idea to get some advice at that stage.
Right. Can I ask you just a simple a question regarding, you were talking about financing. So in some cases, rather than just a cash call from the owners of each strata unit in the complex, do councils undertake a borrowing to finance such a massive $1 million plus repair job, and then assign repayment of the loan prorated to each of the unit owners? Is that how that borrowing stuff works? I've never heard of it before.
That's how it should work, and that's probably a whole separate topic for discussion on your show at some point in the future. It's a way essentially to assist people that may find it difficult to come up with the entire $15,000 to $20,000 in one shot.
Right.
And it is an option that I think now with financial institutions such as the banks and the credit unions getting into this market, you're going to see a lot more stratas looking at financing for these types of projects.
Oh, okay. I just hadn't heard of that possibility before, so thank you for sidetracking with me on this. So ideally, before anything begins, any commitment of any finances, even just the overall assessment of the problem and the possible solutions, legal advice wouldn't be bad right from the get-go then.
It wouldn't, and we're not talking about something that's terribly expensive. I mean, oftentimes what I recommend to people is have a council meeting where a lawyer is invited to ask questions, to answer questions from the council on this process. How is it done? What happens if it's defeated? People typically have questions like, how is this going to impact us if we don't do the repairs? What is our personal liability as council members if we don't do repairs?
Right.
All of those questions can probably be answered in a half-hour discussion, half hour to an hour discussion, and that will help the council develop a roadmap for implementing the project.
And having that first and probably pretty gruesome meeting with the owners involved, because each of those people, as Tony has just said, is going to have to pony up some hard cash, and many of them are going to go, fine, I've looked at the reports, I understand this is a necessary repair, kind of been expecting it for a while.
Right.
Others are going to go, excuse me, I just moved in. You want $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for what?
Yeah.
I just got here. So, I mean, it's not going to be unanimous in any way, is it?
That's right. And in a strata, you're always going to have a problem that an owner in a single-family home doesn't have, which is you fix your roof or your plumbing when you observe it to be leaking.
Sure.
In a strata, you may never see any evidence of problems in your individual unit.
I suppose, yeah.
And say, why are we doing this? It's only a problem in 2 or 3 units or 2 or 3 parts of the building where the leaking is recurring constantly.
Right, and Tony, that's where the council has to go, right. those are the symptoms. We've already got issues in a half a dozen units in our 128 unit complex here. So do we need 128 leaks, or can we take a look at 6, knowing that 122 more are on the way, and get going on this thing? That's what they have to do, right?
Well, in one of the cultural perspectives that you'll find within some professions and even some cultures is that you'll find people will want to run things to failure before they fix them.
Okay.
From my perspective, the minute you start to have pipe failures in a building, you've run to failure.
Yes.
You don't wait for the entire building to fail. And in this building is a textbook example of it, because they've had 3 leaks. They've had 3 insurance claims. The insurance claims over the last 2 years have mounted up over $250,000 of repairs. So their insurance deductible, when it gets renewed in August, they've been told will be $100,000.
Oh boy.
Until their pipes are replaced. And $100,000 essentially means the Strata in so many ways is now self-insuring.
Yes.
Right? So you get a pipe leak causing damage in the building, and the Stratas, when they should be spending the money that they have in their reserves right now, in
Right.
their reserve funds, to be redoing the piping, they're bleeding cash into actually doing Band-Aid repairs on the building.
Okay.
And so it's this one, believe it or not, repiping in buildings is actually not a hard sell to the owners.
Okay.
When the owners see the relationship between cost, rise of insurance deductibles, and knowing that all this money is just coming out of their pockets for these costs inevitably, what we're going to have is the owners themselves are going to just start supporting this. The other thing that owners need to know about this, though, is you have a $100,000 deductible. If they end up with a $140,000 claim, the Strata is going to pay the $100,000 deductible, because if it's a pipe failure in the building, the Strata Council might just levy that against the owners. They don't need a 3/4 vote to levy an insurance deductible.
Interesting.
So the owners are going to start paying out of their pockets in any case, right? Pay it only once, take control of it, and pay the minimal amount, as opposed to this unmanaged risk that's going to make it very difficult. The other thing in buildings, it's almost impossible to sell a unit for any reasonable market value in a building that has pipe failures.
Well, that's true.
That they're not being
that would be a
replaced,
bit of a
right?
hard sell, now, wouldn't
Right?
it? Yeah.
Well, and try and get mortgage approval
Yeah.
if that's the condition, because the mortgage insurers now and the mortgage providers are doing things like looking at the insurance policies. What is the deductible in this building? Why is it $100,000? What's going on here?
Sure.
We're giving you a mortgage ratio of 80%, and what do you mean you have a $100,000 deductible? You could never cover it.
Yeah.
Right? And so, there's starting to be a cognizant relationship. If you looked at a depreciation report before you got into the building, it should articulate that these components are coming up to the life expectancy.
Yeah. Paul, you posed an interesting rhetorical question by way of examples that a lawyer could provide with a strategy session to a Strata Council prior to the big meeting to announce this major renovation undertaking. One of the rhetorical questions was, what is the liability of the Strata Council if they don't go forward with this necessary renovation? And what's the answer to that?
Well, the Act requires the council to act in good faith and in the best interests of the strata. Acting in good faith, I would say, means relying on the advice of qualified experts and doing what you can as a council to put forward options to the owners to vote on these major decisions. And if the owners defeat things, I think as long as a council has been following that advice, acting on reasonably reliable advice from qualified people, then their exposure, I would say, would be zero.
Okay.
Where a council runs into trouble, and there haven't been as many cases where this has arisen here in British Columbia that have been litigated, but there have been some back east, is where the council gets advice, but there's someone on council, maybe 1 or 2 people, who believe they know better than the experts, and they choose to disregard that advice and implement some other form of repair, which they're even told, you do that, it's never going to work.
Yep.
And then the problems continue. And there was a case back in Ontario where an owner who was unable to live in their unit for 5 years in a penthouse because of roof
Repairs
leaks
and such?
actually got a claim against the Strata for $1 million.
Wow.
For not being able to live in their unit. Now, there's no discussion about whether council members were personally liable for that, but that would certainly be an argument that should be made on behalf of that owner if there was any issue about collecting that money.
Okay, so now we're talking on this particular edition of Quay Pacific's Talk About Strata, about what happens in a strata, and Tony has generously provided us with a very good example, a 27, 28-year-old building on the west side of Vancouver, which contains 128 units, that is desperately in need of repiping. And it's going to be expensive because when this building was constructed, they put the pipes right into the concrete. So it's a major undertaking. So if you live in this building or one like it, you're going to be faced with some pretty hefty costs when these sorts of major renovations come up. So how do you deal with it? As perhaps a member of the Strata Council or just an owner in that particular Strata group? We'll continue with more here on Quay Pacific's Talk About Strata with lawyer Paul Mendez, Tony Giventu, and me, Sterling Fox, right after this.
Delivering relevant and beneficial consumer information. This is Experts on Call. And there's more still ahead on AM 650.